Welcome. My name is Mikko Merimaa and I work for VTT. Today I will take a sip of science and a sip of real strong coffee and take the discussions to space. I hope to see what is going on there as we go beyond year 2020. My fellow astronauts today are Tauno Vähä-Heikkilä, Marko Höyhtyä, and Rafael Popper. Welcome. Tauno is the Vice President of VTT Microelectronics. Dr. Vähä-Heikkilä is also the Director of Millilab, which is an ESA external laboratory on millimeter wave technology. Marko is our co-creation manager. He is coordinating space technology research at VTT. Dr. Höyhtyä was also a visiting researcher at the European Space Agency in 2019, and his personal research topics include connectivity, autonomous systems, and development of satellite technologies to improve life on Earth. Rafael Popper is principal scientist in Foresight-driven business strategies at VTT. Dr. Popper is also a director of executive education in foresight and sustainable futures at the University of Manchester in the United Kingdom. But now let's kick off with the discussion. 3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition and liftoff. Before we reach the orbit, Marko, Tauno, and Rafael, could you give your own perspectives on why space is relevant to us flatlanders today and even more in the coming years and decades?
Well, if we just look from the consumer perspective, even without knowing, many people are using satellite technologies in their everyday life. And we just need to ensure that those services will remain functional and safe also in the future. And of course, we would like to develop even better services for people to improve their life.
Yes, thank you. I think space is going to be increasingly an exciting area for technology development and innovation in years to come. And 2020 has demonstrated how important deep space missions are for several countries. Some of them also newcomers are investing heavily on space and in missions to Mars. This year, the Emirates has been in the headlines for several days and weeks, and we will see that next year. And the topic will become hotter and hotter when those missions reach their destination and start reporting back. So I can only see a promising future for the space sector in years to come.
Yeah, and I think that for most of us, the space is important because we can see the stars and moon and other things hopefully every night. But then, in addition to these visual effects that we can see on the nighttime sky, there are lots of interesting technologies which we are excited about, and I think our purpose is not to, let's say, show the technologies always, but to have services that every people can use in their life without knowing that actually there are space technologies behind of the services.
Thank you. Marko, you little bit touched the same topic as Tauno and mentioned that the space technology plays an important role in our lives. And like Tauno said, most of us do not even necessarily know it. Could you elaborate a bit more? What are the space-related technologies that affect the everyday life on Earth?
Okay, maybe the simplest example is the positioning. So whenever you open in your phone Google Map, you are relying on the satellites that are providing the location. And when you navigate to your destination, the satellites are telling you where to go and what routes to select. And this is not only for the phones, but when you, for example, take a flight to some place, or you are going to the ship and you are far from the ground, you are essentially relying on satellites. They are ensuring that the trip will be safe and the captains will know where to go. And they also they use the connectivity in addition to this positioning. So for the professionals, and when you are sitting on board of Finnair flight and you would like to browse web, you are doing that via the satellite. And of course, one big part is also every day checking the weather forecasts. And Tauno might want to tell a little bit what we are doing on that.
Yeah, so I think that's the daily discussion topic almost for everybody, that what is the weather like today or tomorrow or about in a week. And this, let's say, having more accurate weather forecasts, there are many technologies that are helping there, but especially satellites are used for making these images and predictions, data for predictions. And in Finland, we have VTT together with companies making now the next generation weather satellite, METOP second generation. We hope that this will give us even more accurate weather predictions like we are having now.
Okay.
Yeah, and
let's leave the orbit for a minute and venture deeper into space. Mars continues to be a hot topic in the space discourse. Now, VTT has had an opportunity to work on a mission to inhabit Mars together with the United Arab Emirates Space Agency. This is really interesting. The space travel has sparked my imagination since I was a teenager. Rafael, could you tell a little bit about what your team is working on?
Certainly. We had a very exciting request from the Space Agency in the Emirates to help them devise a plan, a roadmap on how to channel their investments in order to achieve the ambitious goal of inhabiting Mars in the next 100 years. This is just the first step in a process whereby we were scoping what sort of critical issues and technologies were necessary. And to do so, the second step immediately was to mobilize a number of players, international players that have been investing heavily in space for many decades, together with newcomers, and trying to understand what is the actually landscape of stakeholders in the space sector, and what are their needs, what are their hopes, and what are their strengths in terms of technologies. And in this process of mobilization, we entered into what we call the next step of the process, where we, together with a number of stakeholders, we mobilized and we co-created a number of opportunities. Those opportunities were analyzed and were assessed in a real-time Delphi survey that mobilized players all over the world to prioritize and to identify what are the critical issues. Those critical issues included opportunities and included the strengths of the players, the drivers, but also a number of barriers that they need to overcome in order to achieve those goals and threats ahead. Once these were prioritized and also identified together with technology areas, we move into the next step, which was in order to develop some actions and action roadmaps. We mobilized, again, number of stakeholders in a workshop in Washington, DC, in a big conference. We organized a workshop where we were prioritizing those technology areas, and we identified the ones that the Emirates should be invested on. Then those priorities were taken back to Finland, to Espoo, where with our VTT space experts, we were identifying opportunity pathways for them to develop new technologies, to innovate, and to work on new as well policy areas that were taken to a workshop, a final workshop in Abu Dhabi, together with multiple players in their own landscape of investors and policy makers working in the area and researchers to take those priorities forward and to co-create an action roadmap that led to the final product, which is coming in a few weeks. We will see the white paper coming out. And in that white paper, we have a number of priorities that will help them develop those programs for future investments in years to come in order to achieve the mission of inhabiting Mars, or at least to have a permanent settlement of humans in Mars in years to come.
Thank you. Rafael, if I remember correctly, in our earlier discussions, you mentioned also the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is probably linked to the work that you have done, and how does this, what does the sustainable development mean in the context of space?
Yes, sure, the Sustainable Development Goals play a very important role in low Earth orbit existing activities, but in deep space also play a sustainable step towards better understanding of how humankind might survive in case something happens to this planet. If we manage to settle ourselves or a proportion of human beings on Mars, then we might be talking already about a plan B if something happens. So it's about resilience in one way, but it's also about understanding the conditions of survival of human species under very harsh environments. And to do so, we conducted a 5-step methodology. I mentioned already the scoping, but the second step required mobilizing a variety of stakeholders and mapping the space of experts and players that can contribute to the big picture, to the big mission of settling on Mars. A third step in this process was anticipating and co-creating future agendas for technology development, and understanding as well what are the priorities in terms of critical issues, what are the drivers, what are the opportunities, but as well what are the threats and the barriers to reach such an ambitious goal. We also develop a series of recommendations that we might come back to later on during this talk about the strategic level actions, the tactical and the operational that we might want to take into account to fulfill the goal, and we mobilize different experts. In Washington, we organized a workshop. Then we brought back the results to ESPO. Here at VTT, with space experts, we were looking at the specificities of those results. And then finally, in Abu Dhabi, we organized a multi-stakeholder workshop where we look and what are the priorities in the context of the Emirates in order to produce the white paper as a final step.
Thank you. Marko, I know you are working on the sustainability of space activities from a slightly different perspective. You are tackling the problem of the space junk. Why the space junk is a problem and how it can be solved.
Yes, that's one project we have been working on quite actively in the recent times. And as Rafael earlier mentioned, we are living in a new space era. There are exponential growth of small satellites in the orbit, and that increases the probability of collisions as well. And the space junk has been identified by European Space Agency and NASA as one of the key challenges of mankind. There are now more than 20,000 objects tracked in the orbit. So there have been more than 5,000 satellites are up there, but less than 2,000 of them are operational. So there are like dead satellites floating around, and in addition there are smaller objects. And when those metal and plastic particles, they are traveling multiple times speed of bullet. So something like they can hit like 10 kilometers per second to the satellite or space station, and of course that impact will even for small piece of chunk will create problems and can destroy the services. And of course, if we want to go to the Mars according to Rafael's plans, we need to avoid those chunks and debris in the space. So the ways to handle it is, first we need to detect. So we need to detect where the debris is to be able to plan our launches and to be able to maneuver the satellites to avoid collisions. And of course, we need that information when we want to collect a chunk away from the space. So there are now plans that we will send a robot space cleaner satellite into the orbit. That it will hug the dead satellite and come back to atmosphere to burn it away. And of course, the best thing to do is to plan all the missions in a way that we don't cause any debris. So there need to be plan how to get the satellite in the end of the lifetime back away from the space.
How do you see it, Marko? Is this space debris, is it mostly a problem for satellite constellations, or is it a real risk in sometime in the future also for this space travel?
It is for both. And one of the biggest causes of the current debris situation was that the Chinese, they destroyed with their experiment one satellite using a missile. And I think that it was something like 25% of all tracked debris right now is because of this single missile hit to the satellite. And of course, when we have big amount, tens of thousands of particles traveling very fast there, they are causing challenges both for traveling and for the equipment there.
Yes, VTT has been a key player in this Finnish space industry for decades. How do you see the future of the Finnish space companies and research? What are actually our key strengths on space? Tauno, I think you have an opinion.
Yeah, I think Finland and Finnish companies and research organizations, universities have a long background in the space technologies and science as well. But then I think there's now coming some sort of change that, of course, there are big satellites which are far away, and Finnish companies have been typically providing some instruments and electronics and software for the satellites, and for sure that kind of trend is continuing. But let's say Finland doesn't have own satellites, let's say own big satellites. But then now things are changing, and like I can show you that this is a satellite that we have been developing with Reactor Space Labs. So and there are some sensors or telecommunication equipments, and this was a real size. So it's like 2 milk cans, so a few liters. And this is, let's say, we call this new space, and it means that nowadays it's possible for small countries and even individual companies to send their own satellites if they see that there's, let's say, there are businesses either from the technology or from the service side, and I believe that this is the future for at least one important part of the Finnish industrial future in the space technologies. And then I could also mention that this is kind of a technology transfer possibility as well, that especially for the big satellites, we have been developing at VTT together with companies many different sensors and technologies, for example, millimeter wave technologies since 90s. And then the same knowledge and competencies that have been developed for the space applications have been applied during last years to telecommunication equipments. That's kind of how we are transferring technologies satellite missions to terrestrial applications. And then on the other hand, for these small satellites that you just saw, they are cheaper, and the idea is that we use also cheaper technologies. So, for example, we can use sensors and electronics and software from commercial products and apply them to satellites. So I believe that this is also very good opportunity for Finnish companies, since we have been always kind of forerunners in the technology development and applying technologies.
Marko, you have also been working for a long time on satellite technology. Perhaps you could a little bit complement Tauno's view.
Yes, definitely. I agree everything with that Tauno said, and in addition to Reactor Space Labs, we could maybe mention that ICEYE is one of the good examples of Finnish space industry right now. They are getting a lot of global interest and investments, and they while developing their own constellation of remote sensing satellites. One example of those technologies that their technology transfer from the terrestrial domain to space is happening is telecommunications, as Tauno mentioned, and be strong in that we have 5G technology, we have 5G test networks, and this is something that we have been recognized also globally, and also European Space Agency wanted to start strategic partnership with the last year on the topic. So we are together developing technologies for the 5G networks, not only for the terrestrial but the non-terrestrial aspects. So how to use the drones and high altitude platforms and satellites in different orbits to provide connections.
And Rafael, I believe you have a little bit different perspective as you work with Foresight. What is your take on the matter?
Yes, we have been using Foresight primarily to identify a number of areas where we could be contributing in terms of research and innovation, and also shaping the policy agenda of particularly the Emirates' future investments in terms of what are the opportunity pathways that we can see today that will influence short, medium, and long-term missions to Mars. And we have identified areas where we could co-create a number of initiatives that will help the Emirates grasp those opportunities with the help of VTT technologists and VTT scientists. Not just Foresight, but there are a number of areas where we could be meaningfully contributing in terms of technology development and testing and demonstrating a number of pilot activities. I can give you a few examples. For example, we have a very strong team working in innovations regarding mixed reality systems for training and operations, and some of those systems have already been used actively by the European Space Agency. The idea here is to support the development and the deployment of systems such as robots, rovers, and manuals to support work. And that requires development in terms of robotics, software and applications, and modeling and simulation tools with the help of IT and processing techniques that VTT is really leading at the moment in terms of research. Another example has to do with the creation of virtual experience simulating Earth and Mars in a virtual environment that will help people to understand how life will be on Mars, and help as well to reduce risks for the settlers and how to handle scarcity in terms of resources that people will have. Another example has to be in the area of sensing, where VTT is really a leading player. And we are working on potentially piloting some smart sensing tools for Mars environments, how to maintain the health of the first settlers. Just a few days ago, there have been a number of people saying that yes, there will be missions to Mars, especially Elon Musk mentioned that he's planning for those, but it's very likely that those first settlers will die. So the idea here is how to simulate and to create the technologies that will allow us to avoid such scenario for the first settlers. And then there are other interesting initiatives that we thought about, and how to use, for example, mines that are no longer operational, and to build some prototypes, constructing some airtight underground structures and facilities here on Earth that will simulate the harsh living condition on Mars. And this could be done with some of the Finnish mines that are no longer active in the mining sector, but they could be used as a prototype to create such airtight facilities and innovations that we might end up using on Mars if we don't want to live on the surface of the planet, but if we, some of the settlers might consider living underground. And there are several more opportunity pathways that we have identified. Especially, we had one of these SIP of Science focused on the agriculture of the future, cellular agriculture. So planned cellular agriculture for food production in space will be the norm in the future there, and maybe as well in planet Earth. So there is also plenty of synergies for multidisciplinary work and developments that only the research and the technology development to achieve those missions to deep space initiative will also bring a lot of benefits and positive impacts here on Earth already, and synergies to collaborate with other research groups.
In the context of technology development, the concept of new space was already mentioned several times. In the recent years, there have been efforts to turn spaceflight into a commercial industry. Tauno, what does this mean for those involved with the space technology?
I think that this is really a new era in the space. Let's say using of space as a part of our let's not daily life yet, but as an opportunity that people can travel to the space. And let's say compared to the situation in the past when only this was possible for governmental programs from big countries like from the US or at that time Soviet Union, Russia lately, and then other big countries in Europe like Germany, France, and so on. But it is interesting to see that now these, let's say, commercial industries coming, and they are offering these flights to the space. And this is, let's say, space traveling itself, it's still expensive, and I think it's not possible for many of us in practice because it is so expensive. But then, on the other hand, this is also a big game changer for the space technologies and sciences around that, because now it's also possible to send its own satellites and have Earth imaging, Earth observation data, or new communication systems, and the, let's say, launching of satellites has become also, let's say, for reasonable cost level because of the commercial actors in the space domain. So I think that makes space in practice closer to us.
Do you agree, Marko?
Yes, I agree. I agree totally. And it is the possibility for small countries and small organizations, possibility for them to reach the space and have their own satellites and instruments. It will accelerate the innovations, and we will have more good services coming for us.
Now, before we leave the orbit, I wish you to look forward. Rafael, Marko, and Tauno, what is coming ahead of us beyond 2020? And what is the thing that you find most exciting?
I think there are plenty of topics to pick on this particular question. But in terms of excitement, we need to be realistic as well on what can be done and what kind of resources are available for all these different type of ideas. And then when we put our feet back on Earth, we need to look into different type of national and international space strategies that are going to make such an ambitious and exciting plans happen. There are several good news for those space enthusiasts. And basically next year is going to be very exciting because the missions that were launched a couple of months ago to Mars will be reaching their destination. And there will be a big hype about hopefully the success of those missions reporting back and then giving us more information about, for example, the atmosphere around Mars and different pieces of information that will enable developments and innovations that will make some of those visions happen. What is important is by keeping our feet on the ground, is that we keep an eye on the strategies that are going to really fuel the different projects that will help us achieve those goals. So the provision of competitive and leading space services will be one of those strategies that is shaping the programs in the Emirates and many other space agencies. Then the development of advanced local capacities in space technology, manufacturing, R&D will be a second area to look at. Launching inspiring space scientific and exploration missions has been a big topic this year, and there will be many more coming as well. There are announcements not just to send missions to Mars, but also to Moon and to Venus and beyond. So this is one of the areas where we will be hearing more and more, depending on how the investment landscape look at in the future, and we can come back to this my final comment. Then creating a space culture and expertise will be another area that requires really a lot of efforts in order to mobilize civil society and young scientists to grow their expertise in this area and to join these journeys. Effective local and international partnerships and investment in the space industry is another strategy that the Emirates is pursuing. And finally, to ensure the legal framework and infrastructure needed for this initiative. Now, I mentioned already that investment landscape is important because with the COVID situation, we could see that many venture capitalists have been really cautious in putting their bets on space at the moment when the market is quite turbulent and uncertain. And we could see already that many of those very promising startups started to file for bankruptcy a few months after the corona crisis pandemic started. Now we're facing a second wave, and we need to look carefully at the market and see how many of those startups will survive and will be flourishing next year. It also creates a lot of opportunities for big players and newcomers to grasp and to buy some of those already promising ventures, but that they are drying out of cash. So it's very turbulent and very uncertain times at the moment, but it's also very exciting because regardless of these potentially, I call it the potential black hole in the investment landscape in the space area, that black hole might also lead to a lot of opportunities that will bring mergers and acquisitions, but also bring new challenging and interesting ideas for 2021 when the current missions to Mars start reporting back.
And Marko, what is your future excitement on space?
Of course, in this new space era, I'm excited that Finland is strengthening as a satellite nation, and we are happy to support the companies from VTT in this aspect. But to select a couple of technologies, I would say that coming from connectivity background, I find it exciting that there are those mega constellation initiatives where you have hundreds or thousands of satellites covering the whole Earth, and then you have this idea of creating three-dimensional networks with 5G and beyond technologies where you could support operation anywhere, and using those to create, let's say, autonomous ships or autonomous cars where you could travel without having so many humans on board. That is something, let's say, not necessarily in very short term, but quite short term topic still. This is something that I'm excited. And in the long term, of course, this deep space exploration and possibility to find life is very exciting, and there were some signs already found.
Indeed. This is actually very interesting and exciting. Tauno, what you can see that is coming ahead of us?
Yeah, I think what is exciting also is this space science and astronomy and things that we see in the newspapers and all of us can see even local newspapers that when there are new scientific findings related to space. So that is very exciting. But then if we go more towards new technological themes, I think that these small satellites that we are developing, like this particular one, will be launched to the space early next year, and we are also involved in a few other small satellite missions. So I think that's very exciting to see that what we are getting out of those missions. And then let's say we are sending these as prototypes of prototype satellites for developing new services. And for example, I feel it very important that we could have, let's say, near real-time imaging data from the space. For example, at summertime when we go for swimming, would be really nice to see almost in a real time, or let's say within few hours delay, that what is the blue-green alga situation in the lakes. So is it safe to go for swimming or not? And if not, which lake should I choose going for swimming? So I think space technologies can help us in our, let's say, ordinary daily life.
Yes, I fully agree. Rafael, Marko, and Tauno, thank you for the excellent discussion over a cup of coffee. And thank you to all of you who listened to chatting. Should you find some of the topics discussed today interesting, VTTs are happy to provide you with more information. We are looking forward to seeing you also in the upcoming episodes of the Sip of Science. See you there. Bye.